demonstrate his love for us, for me, for you. Hopefully, I'll be able to, together we will look at and see for ourselves how his love is demonstrated to each of us. So we know that when God created the world, back in Genesis, the universe, he created it perfectly. There was no sin, there was no violence, no blemish, there was peace and harmony. And if we look at Genesis chapter 1, 31, we see what God thinks of what he made. And it says this: God saw all that he made, and it was very good. It was just how God wanted it. Adam and Eve knew God, they walked with him, and they had a special relationship with him. Then a moment of madness happened, and as we see, where they listened and obeyed a talking snake. Didn't the alarm bell start ringing then when they started having this conversation with the snake? I don't know. But obviously it didn't. But they listened, didn't they? They obeyed this snake. The sin came into the world, and everything then has gone downhill from them. Death has come in, sin, there's consequences to sin, and our actions. So murders, the consequences, they go to jail. Even on the weekend, consequence of me being out in the sun too long was I get burnt. There's consequences to things, isn't it? We see murder coming in. Cain, first murder, isn't it? Cain killed Abel in Genesis chapter 4, verse 8. We see God destroyed the world with a flood because of the people's sin. God killed all the firstborn in the land of Egypt with the plague, didn't he? Because Pharaoh wouldn't let God's people go. In Exodus 11, verse 1 to 10, you can look at that. We see God God destroyed the city as well, isn't it? He destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis 19. And then I guess a bit more recently then we see Hitler killing all the Jews in Auschwitz. We see people sin today, don't we, in the world. And then, as we've already mentioned, Margaret, isn't it, we see what's happened in Mariupol in India. And even more recently, people came up to me in school upset because her uncle had been murdered a couple of days before by the uncle's brother. This is what's happening. There's sin that's coming into the world. And we don't have to look much further at ourselves. We see the selfishness. We went away for a couple of days. It was all about me, what I wanted to do. It's the selfishness. And this is what's happened. This world we're living in, because of this one event, is a mess. We've separated ourselves from God because of it. Our relationship with him is broken. So what now? Humanly speaking, it's game over for us, isn't it? Just this one event. That as we see from this one event, we see it in Romans 5:12. Therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man, and death through sin, and in this way death came to all people, because all have sinned. This is bad news, isn't it, for each and every one of us. Through one man's sinning, it's affected us all. It's the most contagious disease you will ever have. I'm not going to leave it there, though, because where there's bad news, isn't it? There's good news. I don't know, maybe you've asked people before, whenever you ask people, do you want the good or the bad news first? They usually say, oh, we'll have the bad news first, get it over with, because there's good news to come, and they would rather have that. And that's what I'm going to do, is giving you the bad news first. So as we've seen, the whole book of Romans is about Paul hammering home the gospel, the truth. The only reason we get into heaven is by being justified by faith. It's by God's grace, and not in works. Nothing we can do or have done. It's only by the grace of God through Jesus that we are saved. And Paul wants us to make sure the Jews, the Gentiles, his readers, they understand this. That there's nothing in them, there's nothing in us, any works or act of kindness that will save us from God's wrath and punishment to come. other than being justified by Jesus' blood. And if we go back a chapter, or 2 chapters, chapter 3 of Romans, verses 23 to 28, it says this: For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and all are justified freely by the grace through the redemption that came by Christ Jesus. God presented Christ as a sacrifice of atonement through the shedding of his blood, to be received by faith. He did this to demonstrate his righteousness, because in his forbearance he had left the sins committed beforehand unpunished. He did it to demonstrate his righteousness at the present time, so as to be just, and the one who justifies those who have faith in Jesus. Where then is boasting? It is excluded. Because of what law? The law that requires works? No, because the law that requires faith. For we maintain that a person is justified by faith, apart from works of the law. So we're all in the same boat. We're all sinners, each and every one of us. And the only way we can do anything about it is by trusting Jesus as our Saviour, by being made right by faith in him alone. It's not by keeping the law. It's not by making sacrifices that they used to, or by any good work we do. If that was the case, then we'd be able to boast and say then we've had a part to play in our salvation. But that's not what it is. Even Abraham, in Romans chapter 4, 1 to 3, says this: What then shall we say that Abraham, our forefather, according to the flesh, discovered in this matter? If in fact Abraham was justified by works, he had something to boast about, but not before God. What does Scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Even Abraham did the necessary sacrifices that he was supposed to. He listened to God, he was going to sacrifice his son. But even that is not what would have saved him. It's the fact that he believed in God, and righteousness was credited to him. He couldn't boast in anything, he did. Now, if someone credits something to you, say to your account, £100, it means it's given to you by someone, isn't it? They give it to you. So this righteousness from God was given to Abraham. It wasn't earned. He couldn't do anything to get that righteousness. Neither can we, neither can you. It is given to us by God. And this is what Paul is trying to get across to us. This gospel is about Jesus and what he has done. Not about our works, not about trying harder or even keeping the law. It's the fact we're justified by faith in Jesus. Anyway, isn't that freeing? All you have to do is believe in Jesus and what he has done. We don't have to do anything other than trust in Jesus for our salvation. Maybe you're sitting there, maybe you think, I've done enough to earn my way to heaven. That you are getting there because of your kindness, because of honesty, trying harder to keep the commandments. Or do you realise you have no part to play in your salvation? There's nothing you can boast about. There's nothing you've contributed to it. There's nothing in yourselves. All you can do is believe in what Jesus has done and him alone. So we'll come to the text now. I'm going to concentrate on verses 7 and 8. So verse 7 says this: Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person, someone might possibly dare to die. Now, whenever I've read that, I've always thought, well, it's more likely that someone would be more likely to die for the righteous person than a good person. I think I've always assumed a righteous person was a godly person, because righteousness, as we just said, comes from God. Okay, it was given to Abraham. But when looking at it a bit more, that doesn't seem to be the context in this case. So what's the difference then between a righteous person and a good person? So it seems in this context, a righteous person is someone upright, keeps the law, honours the commandments, obeys rules and regulations, very well spoken perhaps. It's just correct in their behaviour and what they do and how they conduct themselves. The type of person who annoys them in daylight, some of you, really. And then there's the good person, and he does all the same things as the righteous person. The difference is he does it with love. He goes that extra mile. If someone asks for his shirt, he'd give him his jumper as well. He's that type of person. He's not just correct in the way he goes about. The way he's just correct in the way he goes about things. It goes beyond that. He's driven by love. So I'll try and illustrate this perhaps a bit more in a way, a bit more understandable perhaps. So as a teacher in work, okay, they're a good teacher. This person turns up to work on time, goes to all the teacher meetings they're supposed to go to. They do the after-school clubs for the kids. They make sure the children are in the correct uniform. He'll go through all the behaviour strategies before he kicks them out of the class. And he follows the rules to the T. He's correct in the way he conducts himself in teaching the kids, okay, the children. Then there's another teacher then, okay, who does all those same things as that first teacher. There's something different in the way they teach. They have a smile on their face. They interact with the children. They go around making an effort to make sure that the kids know what they're doing. They know what work they've got to do. In the after-school clubs, they don't just put them on, they join in with them. They go that extra mile. They're driven by the love of teaching in the children. There's that something extra. It's not just the correctness of the first teacher. They go far beyond that. And this is the kind of difference between a righteous and a good person. Okay? So Paul is saying that very rarely will anyone die for someone like the righteous person that doesn't really have love. Okay? And is more concerned about keeping rules and regulations and is just correct in their behaviour. You know, we might say they're a goody two-shoes. No one likes a person like that, let alone want to die for them. Okay? Paul then goes on to say, possibly will someone die for a good person. Someone who has love in them, who will go that extra mile for you. You will have perhaps a more of a bond with. And that's only a possibility. And it's conditional. So Paul is building us up now, I think, ready for verse 8, by using these two examples of conditions of who we may or may not die for. Okay? Is your love conditional towards God? Do you only love him when he gets you out of trouble? When you see that he's protected you from a certain danger? There is no condition for God's love. He loved you before you loved him. So we are sinners because of Adam, this one event. We've fallen short of the glory of God. Our relationship is broken. We are on our way to hell. There is no rules, there's no regulations, works that we can do to stop that happening. So there's the bad news, and we are all in that, okay? So what's the good news? Well, if we look at verse 8, it says this, but God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. If you notice, Paul is using the present tense. He doesn't say God demonstrated his love for us. He demonstrates his love, which implies this love is for now. It's ongoing. It's not in the past. Now, when I married Sarah, that was my demonstration of love. We had a wedding ceremony. We got married. We had the vows. That's our demonstration of love. That was a one-off act. That will never happen again. Plus, Sarah knows she's my best wife. And she's the only one that will put up with me. But if that was just it, the marriage, the wedding, that was my act of love. That's it, done now. That demonstrated love was enough. it wouldn't be much about marriage if it was just on that one act. If I thought, oh, that's my bit done now, I'll carry on like I did before I was married, I wouldn't be demonstrating my love to her. I wouldn't have a relationship with her. And you lot looking on would wonder what was going on because we're supposed to be married. I demonstrate my love daily to her by having a relationship with her, talking to her, spending time with her, having 5 children with her, and most importantly, making her breakfast in bed every morning. These are the things I do by demonstrating my love. And it's an ongoing thing, it's not a one-off event. God's love to us is ongoing. It's not in the past. It's for the present. It's for now. He is demonstrating his love now by us being together here, worshipping together. The fact that we woke up this morning, that's his demonstration of love. The fact that I've had 43 years on this earth, and however much any of you have had, it's all his demonstration of love to you and me. And this demonstration, it's not just for those who love him, it's for those who hate him. It's for us all. It says, isn't it, in Matthew 5:45, I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. That's God demonstrating his love for each and every one of us. And Paul's trying to get us to realise that this demonstrating of love is for now. It's ongoing and for all. Sorry, excuse me. So can you see this practical, everyday demonstrating of love that we have mentioned in your day-to-day lives? I know I do, but do you take it for granted? I know I take it for granted. Maybe you think, well, it's God's job to love us anyway. So the demonstrating we have just been talking about is the practical and everyday love we see in God demonstrating in our lives day to day. But what is the demonstrating of love Paul is talking about in verse 8? And I'll read it again. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. I love the beginning of that verse, because Paul's talked about in the verses before. Paul's talked about the conditions of love, who would die for the righteous person or the good person, and really there was not much hope for either. And then comes the boom. Okay, it says, but God demonstrates. That's the biggest but you will ever know. It's a good job no one walked through the church as I said that, isn't it? It's the biggest but. But God demonstrates in his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So what's the act in that verse? It's in the past. It's Jesus' death. It's a one-off. It will never happen again. Okay? We see in Romans 6:10, for we know that since Christ was raised from the dead, he cannot die. Death no longer has mastery over him. It's done. It's dusted. It's in the past. It will never happen again. It was sufficient. There's no need for that death to happen again. So, what does the verse say then? How does God demonstrate his love? By this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died. What an amazing way to demonstrate his love. While I hated God, while you hated God, while I was completely rejecting him time after time, while I was fighting against him, while I was on a completely separate team that I had no right to be on because of my sin, my self-centeredness. In that ugly state, Jesus went to the cross for me and you, because he was demonstrating that love. Is that sinking in? That love. That while you were in that state, While we were God haters, while we, there was nothing about us, we were ungodly, he still went to the cross. He still came and chose to die for you and me. As I said, we're on completely different teams. I was watching a rugby clip on YouTube of a World Cup game between Canada and France. And the French team, they were stop and play, they went into a huddle to have a team talk to see what next bit of play they were going to do. And while they were in it, you could see one of the Canadian rugby players start sneaking over and joined in the huddle to listen to what they were saying. He had no right to go in that huddle. He wasn't on the same team. And in the same way, we were enemies of God on different teams. We had no right to come to him on our own merits. And yet, even then, God demonstrated love by sending Jesus to die. While we had no right to come to him, while we were enemies, that death is still demonstrating his love today, because it's the only way of salvation. And people are believing, people are being saved because of what Jesus done. That's why his death is still demonstrating that love. Does this love excite you? Do you realize the extent of God's love? That while you hated him, while you didn't care about him, while you carrying on in your own sin, didn't know him, God was still demonstrating his love for you through his death. So I just try to give you another illustration now. So as I mentioned, and as you all know, I am married to Seth. We got to know each other before getting married. We had a relationship, and then we got married and had children. We grew to love each other, and I demonstrate my love to her as much as I can, as I mentioned. But if I said, well, I've been demonstrating my love to her before we met, before I knew her, you'd think, well, you're nuts. What are you on about? And you'd be right, wouldn't you? Because that's impossible, right? And probably, if I'd really known Sarah, what she was like, or she really knew what I was like, then we probably wouldn't have bothered much with each other. God knew me, and he knew you before you were born. He knew that I was a vile sinner. He knew I was going to hate him. He knew my heart was for the desires of this world, that my only thought was about girls and rugby. He knew I was going to be ungodly. He knew I was going to reject Jesus up until I was 18. And knowing all that, he was still demonstrating his love for me by sending his son to die on the cross and for you. He didn't wait until I was born to get to know me and to see if I would love him. He did it anyway while I hated him. So just stop and let's just start and think about that a minute. Think about how you lived your life before being saved. Think about the way you treated other people. Think about the way you treated Jesus. Think about the self-centeredness. Think about all that mattered were the desires and pleasures of this world. Think about how you were hurtling towards hell for eternity without a care in this world. Now think about God's love. Think about how he rescued you from continuing towards hell. Think about how he's demonstrating this love to you, even while you were in that state. God sent his son to die for you, so that you can believe and trust in him. And if you don't, do it now in your seat. Young people, if you don't know that Jesus as your Saviour, do it now. So we see that God is demonstrating his love, even while we're still in the mess we're in, because his love is unconditional. It's not like ours. I mentioned already tonight, it's easy to love people who love us, who get on with us, who would even die for us. God loved us and sent his son, even when we didn't love him. Because his love isn't conditional, it is unconditional. And if he waited for me, for you, for us to love him, it wouldn't happen. Okay? So as most of you know, you love your children, do you? We love our children. We die for them, they love us, and we love them. Okay? And maybe you're the same, but whenever you see your children suffering or in pain, you want to take it for them. You wish you could have that pain so they wouldn't have to go through it. A while back, Kes had these pains in his stomach, okay? And it was horrible. I just wanted to have that pain instead. So I slept in a room on the floor to make sure that she was okay. And if she woke up in pain, I was there for her. I love her. Okay. Now sometimes in work, okay, one of the kids will come up to me and say, "Sir, I feel really sick. I got a bad head and stomach." So I'll say, "Well, have you eaten? Have you had a drink?" Go to first aid and tell him. My response is completely different. I don't love that child like I love Keris. They don't love me like Keris loves me. I don't want to take their pain away, really, because I'm not really that bothered, because my love is conditional. I just hope no one in work listens to this sermon and gets sacked or something. So let's thank God that his love is unconditional. Otherwise, we are in trouble. In the same way, we don't want to see our children suffering and in pain. God doesn't either. He doesn't want to see his children suffering and in pain. Even when we hate him, even when we rejected him, when we're carrying on as if he's not there, he still took that pain and suffering we deserve, that we should have, that he put it on his own son, Jesus, so that we don't have to go through the torment and suffering of hell in eternity. So what unconditional love? Does that blow your minds? Because it should. And the only reason we can love him is that he loved us first. And in 1 John 4:19 it says, "We love because he first loved us." There's nothing of ourselves that can love. It has to come from God. I finish it, we see that Paul is hammering home, don't we, that we are saved by faith through Jesus, and there's nothing we can do. There's no good work that can save us. Not trying harder to keep the commandments isn't going to save us. If that was the case, we'd be able to say, well, we can boast in something we've done, that we've got a part to play, and where then would the glory to God be? So if my salvation does depend or have anything to do with me, and I believed and trusted in Jesus as my Saviour, then I have a bad day. I don't seek God. I don't obey him. I don't feel like reading my Bible or praying to him. My sin gets the better of me, and I keep on doing it. What happens then? Where is my security and assurance then? My moods are up and down. I can't rely or depend on how I feel. But if it's all about Jesus and what he has done, what security is that? What security and relief is that? It doesn't matter how I feel. It doesn't matter whether I've had a good, bad, or day, or whether I've done this or that. My salvation is in Jesus and him only. And there's nothing that anyone or anything can do about that. That's how secure it is. If it's just that we're relying on God, not ourselves. And that's what Paul is trying to get home. It's not about us. It's all about Jesus and what he's done. So as I read earlier, from verse 12 of the text, it says this: Therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man, and death through sin, and in this way death came to all people, because all sinned. That's the bad news for us all, isn't it? Because of one man, we have this disease, sin. It affects us all. There's no getting away from it. And then in verse 17 of chapter 5, for if by the trespass of the one man death reigned through that one man, how much more will those who receive God's abundant provision of grace and of the gift of righteousness reign in life through one man, Jesus Christ? And that's the good news. That's the best news. We have life through this one man, Jesus. Through one man came death, through Adam, through one man comes life through Jesus. Are you thrilled by this love? Let's be thrilled together as a church. Are you excited by the truth that even as a God-hater, an evildoer, a vile offender, while we were still in that state, Jesus died for us? Let's be excited together as a church. Are you joyous that you had no part to play in your salvation? That your security is completely in Jesus and his death alone? Let's be joyous together. Amen.
Amen.